So I think we can start. First of all, thank you all for being here, and I thank also all of those that are joining us online. It's my great pleasure today to introduce this seminar by Professor Lennart Nacke from the University of Waterloo. He's a pioneer in games, gamification, and user experience. And he really is one of the major reference for the whole games research community. In the past 15 years, he published more than 200 academic papers on these topics, and also a best-selling book on games user research. His work continues to shape the way in which we understand and apply AI, user experience, and games research to drive user engagement and change behaviors. I won't add anything more and take any more of your time and leave the floor to Professor Nacke. Thank you.
Mille grazie, Anna Paula. And buongiorno, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, which is changing all of our lives as we're interacting with technologies in ways that we really didn't know we could do before. And it's very much about AI augmentation. And of course, in my area of research, I'm very interested, not just AI augmentation in general, but AI augmentation, of course, for games user research. And this actually goes through all areas of user research, right? Like where I'm focusing very much on games user research, a lot of this can actually be applied, and time and time again, I come across these things that I try out in my own research, and then somebody will comment somewhere on social media and say, you just said that for this very particular area, but it actually applies in so many other fields as well, and like the way that the prompts are engineered and the apps are used just kind of goes through a variety of different areas. I had this little slide in here. I'm gonna start using this beautiful tool, which used to work a second ago. No, it's not anymore. Okay, now it's working. Just had to click on the window. So I used to have this slide about me. Now Anna Paula has done an excellent job introducing me, so a lot of that stuff is not really relevant. Maybe just as a reminder, I'm also teaching classes in UX research and design at my home department, the Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business. And aside from my academic work in the last couple of years, I've also started my own business, become an online creator, whatever that means these days, and have created an online presence around writing academic papers and helping people sort of build academic careers across more than one field. And I've also worked as a UX researcher for the last 20 years. I had the luck of getting a university research chair last year, and I'm a tenured full professor as well. So AI accelerates everything, which is really at the heart of everything, because not only do we have to do things faster, but we have this promise of being able to do all of these things in a fast way that also accelerates the quality of things that we can do. And so while that can be very interesting, it can also be really, really scary, because all of a sudden, as researchers, we love productivity, of course. We have metrics hanging over our head, and people are kind of looking into how can we become more efficient in a way. And so the big promise is that we have this accelerated speed, we have more throughput, we can make research seem faster and cheaper. But as researchers, we're beholden to a higher standard, of course. We have to be rigorous, right? We have to absolutely make sure that we recruit human participants. We have to have the right sessions. What was that, Joe? Can everyone hear me? Are you getting this enough? Okay, I'm going to make sure I hold that in front of my mouth. So Joe has worked with me for 10 years. He's like my little magic genie that will always make sure my performances are great. So just making sure I hold the mic right here. So we're also, we have to transcribe the interviews, we have to quote qualitative data, and we have to produce reports that make a lot of sense to people. So of course, we have now these magical tool stacks. So before I dive into how AI is actually changing the way that we approach research in general, or games user research in general, I wanted to let you know some of these tools that I've been working with more recently that are enabling me to get some of this work done much quicker. And a lot of the stuff might not be new to you, because you might have used some of this yourself as you're engaging with user research, or with any kind of research, really. So one of the first ones that I think should be part of any researcher's arsenal these days, and you might have heard the announcement too, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Things in AI seem like, everything seems like a blur, and just the way the models update. So a year ago, everyone was talking about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is kind of old news now, so I'll show some of the ways I still use ChatGPT, but it's kind of being replaced by Gemini 3. Since Gemini updated to Gemini 3, it's a new frontier model, much quicker, much more fine-tuned. You've heard about Nano Banana probably, the way that you can create images and really build things much quicker. One of the ways that you can do that for free, and this is always interesting for researchers that don't have, maybe the largest budgets available for things, is Google's AI Studio, which is what I use a lot. So the beauty of AI Studio, I'm gonna switch over here. The beauty of AI Studio is that essentially you can just start temporary chats. So this is kind of interesting if you don't want model data to be, or input data to be used to train the model automatically, right? So there's still a risk, of course, whenever you're engaging with an LLM, that you're forking over data. So you should never, and we'll talk about that in my framework, you should never actually use personal data with an LLM. You should always only use anonymized data. And if you have special security restrictions, all of you are working in the EU. The EU has much tighter security restrictions than we have in North America. So you also want to make sure to then just run maybe a local LM in LM Studio or something like that, and just run it locally on your machine. But if you have the opportunity to work with market data or publicly available data or anonymized data, then this is the closest that you can come to harnessing a frontier model, as they are called, so the most cutting edge models to work with. And you would do that in these temporary chats. And what you can see here, I just got new glasses, so it's going to be interesting for me to see it all. But what you can see here is basically you can select the different models here, and you can select Nano Banana Pro, you can select Gemini Pro, and you can do it all for free. So this is something a lot of people are not aware. They think they need to have a Google subscription, they need to be logged into gemini.google.com. You don't. You actually just need to go to AI Studio. This is a platform for developers. And there's a rate limit, of course, in terms of how many queries you can do per day. But a lot of the high-end functionality you can actually test there 100% for free. And so what's the big benefit, you ask, compared to just using it in the chat interface? Now, one of the things you have to know about these LMs is that there's always a system prompt, and the system prompt always spices up the way that you get your result. And the nice thing about doing it in here is that you can build your own system prompt, right? So you have system instructions here where you can create new instructions and add your own system instructions right in the LM Studio. So there is no tainting, I would say, of the output that is being generated. Now, those of you that know all this other stuff that I'm doing on social media also know that I'm a little bit of a prompt engineer as well. So I always try to find out what's the best way that we can structure a prompt. So this is also a beautiful way to work with longer mega prompts, like very long structured instructions, and then get the best possible results. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that's working with AI these days, is that you have to do prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is basically the process of having a task and then trying to get the best possible way of understanding the steps broken down to achieve that task, and then structuring it in a way that the LM understands in the best possible way. So there was just a paper that came out from Ethan Mollick. You might know him. He was also big in gamification. He's one of the leading people in AI now from the Wharton School. And he just did a study looking at the role play of AI. So all of you might know that to get better results, you should always structure your prompt as an act as, or you are, and then giving the AI a role, as in act as a super awesome researcher, and you're very specialized in medical research or something like that. And so he did a study and looked at that, but he didn't look at the high-end model. So a lot of criticism shot at that right now is that maybe for the higher-end frontier models, this might look different, and it does still have an influence. But in his study, he actually saw it doesn't have too much of an influence to do this role play in your prompt. What does have an influence, though, is definitely having a task and having context. So there's this whole new field as part of AI that's being touted right now, which is called context engineering. And context engineering basically means giving enough context so the language model can work off of that context to give you a better possible result. So a lot of students that are just getting started with AI is just write me an awesome essay for X, which is why we're getting this slop of crappy essays. Anyone working in higher ed probably has seen this in the last 2 years. None of my students make spelling mistakes anymore. All of the essays are perfect, and I'd say 80% of them are crap because they're all LM generated, right? So I cannot, I had to restructure the entire way I teach my classes. I cannot ask for any human written essay-based content anymore. It's just impossible because everyone will cheat. Everyone will just use an LM. So now, as part of restructuring my curriculum and how all of us that are teaching in higher ed have to restructure our assignments is basically every assignment involves working with an LM as part of the assignment. If you don't do that, like, I'm sorry, your students are going to be cheating. This is the reality of it, right? So really, we have to integrate LMs in the workflow and not just be like, here is something, do the thing. They will always take the shortcut. This is something I am certain of, and I have observed in the last 2 years that nobody is handwriting stuff anymore. Sure, you know, like 1 or 2, but most of the people will use an LM to generate these instructions. Anyways, and specifically with tools that are free, like Notebook LM and AI Studio here from Google. So having talked about AI Studio a lot now, the other one that is quite interesting for us as researchers is, of course, Notebook LM. Why do I like Notebook LM so much? Has anyone used Notebook LM in the audience? Yeah, a couple, yeah. So one of the things that you might know why it's so good is because it reduces the rate of hallucinations. One of the biggest struggles that we have when we work with large language models is that we run into hallucinations. What is a hallucination? Well, the way that large language models work is that they do text prediction, right? So based on the input that you're providing, it will predict the output. And so there's a likelihood of predicting something based on the input that you've provided. And Notebook LM basically allows you to give it the sources based on which those predictions happen. So you can feed it the PDFs of an entire research paper, and I think this is the most common application that we run into when we write our related work sections. We will download all the PDFs that are part of our related work. We will create a new notebook in Notebook LM, and then we will be able to query those existing PDFs, and it will link with each output. It will link to the exact place in the PDF where the information was gathered. So you can always double check, is it an hallucination or not? And I'd say the hallucination rate is very low. It's something like 10%. So it's very, very low. And this might come surprising to you, but in the lower end, like Google Gemini Fast or the free ChatGPT, the ones that your students are using, hallucination rates are at 45%. That means like basically half of it is made up, which is why those essays are crap. So if you're a student right now, you're using this to do your homework, don't do it. Basically, you have to double check it. A lot of it is made up. There is no proper citations. And Notebook LM is a good way to get those citations properly. Oh, okay. And yeah, so one of the things it introduced recently is actually really nice. It integrated Gemini's deep research into it. So now you can actually go on to discover sources. And of course, you can upload a source. But if we go here, then we now have a button to do deep research. And I could just ask it, find me all the historical data about FBK. Bruno, Kessler. Institute. Really need better glasses. Oh, Foundation is the official. Foundation. Okay. So now it'll go off. It'll do its deep research thing. Basically, going across the web, trying to find all of this historical information data. Should take no longer than 5 minutes, and it will present you with a list of resources. And now, if you know anything about FBK, then you should be able to evaluate those resources, and you can check and uncheck the resources that you want to include. And then you basically have what I call a mini brain that has that specific set of information. Now, of course, this works really well with research questions. So if you have a research question, you could input it there. But as you know, now Google Scholar Labs also has semantic search enabled. Now, those of you still doing traditional keyword searching might not have caught up on the new generation of doing literature reviews, which is semantic search. Some of you might have used Semantic Scholar in the past. What's the big difference? So back in the day, you'd have to find a set of keywords, and then your own brain had to think about, okay, what are possibly related keywords? And this is how we used to do systematic reviews, and we still have to do it that way because semantic search and LMs are a black box, so replicability is not there, basically. It'll change in the next 5 years. never 100% certain that, you know, the methodologies will change, but still right now the gold standard is keyword-based searches. But as you all know, if you've ever done a systematic review and you do it like 2 years later on the same database, the content of the database will likely have changed, and so you'll get different results. So replicability is kind of iffy with systematic reviews, even if you're super systematic, as it is. And one of the things that semantic search will do is basically it takes care of all that guesswork, those word associations that happen. So for example, if you're looking at gamification, but you also want to look at serious games, and you know that those terms are related, but you'd have to put in that knowledge. Whereas semantic search, if you look for gamification, it will automatically think about serious games, it will think about playful design, it will think about experiential design, it will think about game UX and all of these other related terms, and it will automatically search for those related terms and bring them up. So in Scholar Labs, you would be able to find all of that now, or if you use Semantic Scholar or other things, you'd be able to find all of these sources, and then you could manually add them in your Notebook LM brain as well, which is really a quick way of creating, well, I call these things brains, but you can call them whatever. They're like my mini extra brains that I now have. Not just a second brain, I have like a third, fifth, sixth brain. Whatever I'm working on, I will create these little brains that I can just dip into and out of that will have domain-specific knowledge about that research project that I'm working on. And it's really quite fantastic. It works really well with YouTube videos as well. So if you happen to be in a lecture where one of your lecturers will upload all of their lectures to YouTube, I actually now do that for my students, to be honest. So we have an online class, and I used to just give them the links to YouTube lectures, but the new thing is just to create a Notebook LM for that class, and the students can query all of my materials, including the online materials, the PDFs, the lectures, everything, right? So students can decide how they want to learn. They can go and learn through the traditional lectures, or they can speed up and ask specific questions just interacting with the Notebook LM. This is still doing its thing, so I'm just going to let it keep doing that. But I wanted to show you some of the other things that I'm using. This one I don't have open right now. But one of the things is for transcriptions. So those of you doing user research, specifically qualitative user research, may have come to the glory land of understanding that now you don't have to pay an exorbitant amount for human transcribers. So even 10 years ago, I think, we paid a lot of money to ref.com, which was a transcription service where we had to upload MP3s of the interviews, or sometimes if it was sensitive data, we had to do it manually in the lab. It took a lot of hours to transcribe this qualitative data, these interviews that we used to do. Transcriptionist is an app that runs locally on your Mac. I think this is Mac only, sorry, I'm a Mac person, so there's probably no alternative for Windows. But so Transcriptionist is one of the things that you can just run locally, so no uploading to the cloud, and it will just transcribe anything. You can drag and drop a video file, you can drag and drop an MP3 file, and it'll just transcribe it right there. It's very system heavy, so you can hear the fans coming on your computer, but it's really, really cool. It's very, very accurate. You can download different brains for different languages, which is really cool. So let's say you're running a study in Italian, and that's usually the thing with a lot of the transcription services. They don't support multiple languages, but this one actually does. So you can do multi-language transcription, and the fun thing is, so you could, of course, transcribe it in English, you can run it in a local instance, and the LM can actually do the translation for you. So you get those beautiful quotes that you can include. Let's say you ran the study with Italian participants, but you want to publish at CHI or another venue, and you can still in the appendix, I would always include the real source quotes in Italian, but then you could in the paper have the translated quote, and so it makes it much easier for those international reviewers to get up to speed on what you're reviewing. Another thing, and I can demo that for you, is Granola AI. This has kind of replaced all of the way I'm running my meetings. So Granola, where is it here? So Granola basically runs in the background. I used to use Otter. So Otter is an assistant just like, what are the other ones? There's a few that are just joining Zoom meetings, and it's actually kind of embarrassing, I gotta say, because when I started, and this might be the same case for you, I'm a very avant-garde, you might always say, I'm a very pro-AI person before the rest of my institution had caught on. And that was met with a lot of resistance. So there's a lot of traditional academics that think I'm ruining the planet, and there's something, if you were like that in the audience, there's something to be said about that. Yes, AI is very resource intensive, and yes, it is actually killing our planet. So you have to be aware of that, right? There's an ethical trade-off here. And there's, of course, unification of power that's happening with AI companies that is very, very concerning. And I'm not debating that. I'm absolutely 100% clear this is ruining our future, and I'm aware of that. But I'm also it's happening. So I am of the stance that it's better to understand the technology than to just be like, okay, because I have ethical quandaries with the way that technology is invented, I'm just not going to touch it or look into it. So this is something you have to understand as my stance on this. If you have any questions about this, this is not a talk about whether or not it's ethical to use AI. This is your own interpretation, and you're perfectly fine to disagree with me on that. But it's a talk about if you're using AI, that's the best way to use it and make sense of it. So anyways, back to the meeting agents. So it was a little bit embarrassing because, you know, those meeting agents would join the meetings on my behalf and like faculty meetings. And then the first 5 minutes of the faculty meeting was, oh, Lennart's meeting agent is here. Okay, we really, you know, privacy, alert, alert, don't do that. And so it was like these discussions that we had at the beginning. And so I had to remove my agent and just kind of make sure, okay, everyone, I'm sorry, this is automatic. And I was actually sorry because it's like a setting that you do and the agent joins automatically even before you're there. It's a little bit awkward. So Granola prevents that in a way that probably the European Union doesn't really like because strong privacy laws here in Europe. Granola just runs in the background and uses everything that you hear on your Mac or Windows computer, and nobody knows that you're actually using it. So very popular software also for job interviews these days because it just covertly runs in the background, and you can use it on your phone too during phone calls, and it will just do a transcription locally. And actually not locally, it does use the cloud. And then during the transcription, while it's happening, you can prompt it. So you can prompt it based on that. I mean, Otter had a similar service to their stuff. So, you know, ethically questionable, but if you're basically informing, like your lab in this case, and you're saying, hey, I'm using this, I'm using it for my coaching practice as well. As I said, I'm a little bit of an entrepreneur, so I coach academics and academic leaders in terms of like how they can become more effective and productive. And so we use it in our coaching sessions as well because it will easily allow me to create summaries and back up on the things that we're working on. And so I could, this is after the stand-up, so this was our stand-up meeting. We were kind of talking with the research team. And then I can say, what did all my students say? Now it won't know who's my student, but it will try to summarize the people in the meeting because it has the IDs of the people in the meeting because, again, for some reason, I think I don't actually know how it works, but it does know the people that have joined in the call. So it does differentiate the different people. And in this case, because it's a startup, I basically call the people out. I'm like, okay, Sabrina's turn, Simone's turn, Joe's turn, right? And then the AI will understand that now I announced that this next voice should be matched to that name. And then you get these nice little overviews where like strategic partnerships, blah, blah, Geneva. I guess it's all private information, so maybe I should just not show it. But disappear. So it's just a really nice way to get these meetings. Joe's just shaking his head. It's lab internal. It's fine. I can share it with the world. So this is kind of stuff that makes it really quickly to go through some of this information that's out there, and it just makes it really helpful to go through all this meeting stuff. And the nice thing is you can also use it on interviews. Again, like if you're using it for interviews, as long as you disclose what's happening with the information and you're not mentioning any names during that interview, it's also a really nice way to quickly catch up on your interviews because you could literally ask it, give me a first cluster of themes that we discussed. Now, there's a whole thing about thematic analysis with AI that I'm talking about here. If you're a fan of the Brown and Clark methodology, you might have read the recent paper. Joe actually posted that for us recently, where they have a manifesto that vehemently disagrees with using AI for reflexive thematic analysis. So they're anti-AI on that stance because, again, a lot of it is interpretive work. But as I will show you, there's a lot of work actually right now out there in terms of qualitative analysis, like how can we actually use AI to make that work. Anyways, another thing, I'm not going to demo all of them, otherwise we're just doing tool demos today. Another thing that's super helpful is Perplexity's Comet browser. You might know that the big AI companies are releasing browsers. Perplexity is a RAG engine, so this is a retrieval augmented generation. So that means it splices the LM functionalities with actual information from the web. So basically it has replaced Google for me for the last 2 years, really successfully. And yeah, so it has built its own browser, Comet, just like OpenAI has built Atlas. You might have heard that. I've compared both of them. Perplexity works a bit better for me. And the nice thing is you could then have a data source open in Perplexity's browser in Comet, and then you can query that data source. So here I have the RSS feed of feedbacks from the App Store for a particular game. I think it's Clash of Clans or something like that. And then I'm just basically prompting it. So I gave it like one of those mega prompts. Oopsie. Yeah. Where is it? Here. So I gave it one of those mega prompts, show more. where basically, usually those I'm breaking it down into role, context, task, taxonomy definitions, analysis rules, output format, structure, and data, right? And this is really nice. So one of the things, if you work with data in LLMs, is to always ask for JSON files. JSON is just like a really nice intermediary format that you can operate on. So usually then I ask it to put it in JSON format just in the first step. So there's a multi-step interaction with the LLM that happens. And then once it has it in nice JSON data, it's easy to query it. And then you can just ask for a usability report. And so basically what it's doing is market research on steroids. You're going through an app store review of your recent app or game that you've developed. And then you can ask it specifically here to give you an executive summary, give you the friction points, give you a rating, all that stuff that you would do in traditional usability research, the LM does for you. It's a little bit concerning how good that actually is, and even gives you a rating. So at the end, of course, as a human, you still have to kind of go over it and see if you agree with that. But it's a really quick way if you want to use existing data on your app or the thing that you're building and you want to do market research quickly. Because again, these are human reviews that are coming in. They're publicly available, so just a really, really quick way to get an overview of that. And you even get a summary of the recommendations ranked by the pain level of the participants. So the pain points are ranked. So really, really quite amazing what you can do. There's another thing, I'm not going to go through that. This is a custom GPT. So this was all the rage back in the day. This one's called UX Research and Design. So it's a custom GPT, so basically custom instructions, kind of like you do projects in these LMs, and it lets you do anything you want to ask about UX Research and Design. So it's kind of fed on a huge data set and just lets you iterate over that really quickly. Anyways, so that's sort of the little excursion into my tool stack and the way that I'm approaching this stuff. And this is just basically scratching the surface of my daily interactions with AI. But you can kind of see where things are going. So basically everything is just a query away these days. You build these little projects, you build these mini brains. I've only shown you the way that I do these brains in Notebook LM, but I also have projects on most of the major LMs. So for most of my writing tasks, I use Claude, specifically now with the update to Claude Opus 4.5. For any sort of sophisticated writing task, as well as any coding task, Opus 4.5 is superior, in my opinion, to Gemini 3. And most of the other tasks, I'm using custom gems now in Gemini 3. It used to be custom projects in ChatGPT, but I completely moved it over to Gemini when version 3 came out because it's far superior. And as you might know, the context window is really also what makes a big difference. So you have a 1,000,000 token context window, which is just a huge context window that you can operate on, specifically with Gemini 3. But Opus 4.5 is also at the same level of context window. So this is really quite an exciting time to be running these operations. And yeah, so this is kind of what's influencing that for me. So how do you basically build an AI-first strategy then for AI or for games users specifically? So one of the things is there's a lot of studies out there where in those studies, and this is actually our study here, just kind of snuck that in there. So we did a study on reviewers, and we were kind of looking at whether or not reviewers can perceive the difference between AI-generated text. Turns out they can't, or they're not very reliable. And we're not the only study. There's around like 50 studies now that are all looking at this perception of AI. And the interesting thing is, before the study, everyone will say, or as soon as it's disclosed, I should say, as soon as we disclose this is AI-generated text, and those studies are usually done with academics, people will say, no, this is clearly inferior, this is bad, as soon as we tell them it's AI. But if we don't label it, and if we say, like, this is text A, this is text B, you tell me what's better, most people actually, either can't tell the difference, that's a lot of studies, or a lot of recent studies are actually saying they prefer the AI-generated text. So, quite interesting. So take that with a grain of salt. So publicly, people will always say, no, I don't want AI. But then as soon as they cannot distinguish it, and as soon as it's not labeled, people will actually say, okay, this is actually really, really good. So this is an interesting thing that we're seeing. A priori, people will say, no, AI is not for me. But once you actually put it to the test, as you can see here, without labels, the text raters have little preference for AI-generated or human-written text. They can't really tell the difference, and they prefer text labeled human-generated. So as long as you label it, human is like the label people prefer, but again, they can't really tell the difference. And so what I'm trying to do with the strategy idea, and this is based on a quote from Johnny Dankoff, one of the games user researchers at the summit in London, who said, to create a good strategy, is less of a pack of lies. This is interesting because a lot of strategy people will say, this is my strategy, but really, you know, it's a pack of lies that we tell ourselves, as in like, we don't know how to do something. So this is less of a pack of lies and really something more like a collection of very hopeful half-truths. So this is just based on the best of my recollection of how I understand AI and the work we can do with it, with the best intentions and with good reasoning and solid logic behind it. So this is where kind of my idea for how we can use AI in games user research comes from, specifically from my interpretation, my lens on how we can work with that. So one of the things that we do know, even peer reviewers cannot reliably detect AI-generated text. This is the Haddad et al. Study that we did, I think it was 2 years ago, or published 2 years ago. And so there is, you know, invisible quality risks in research output. So if reviewers can't tell, then you know what's going to happen. It's already happening, right? Like, so if you publish at NIPS, I don't know if anyone here is in the AI space and publishing at NIPS. NIPS introduced this AI-based reviewing system where there's still a human in the loop, but the AI generates the reviews. And just a couple of weeks ago, Stanford released their AI reviewer, basically. I don't know if you've tried it out yet, but it's pretty good. You can literally tell it what field you're in, select it, it's free, right? Select it in the drop down, and it will generate a review of your paper. I forgot the name. Do you remember the name of it? Just Google Stanford AI Reviewer, and you will see it. It's one of the tools that they put out there. So this is where we're heading, right? Because this is a pain that we're all feeling as academics. There's little incentive for you to do a review. There's a lot of incentive for you to publish. You've all come across this, right? Like, everyone loves citations, everyone loves research paper output. Nobody really cares if you're reviewing. You're just doing it because you know you kind of have to, because it's part of the job, it's part of the job description. And maybe you're doing it out of your altruistic nature because you feel like you want to foster the community, you want to give back to it, and that is absolutely beautiful. But we are at the point where this is not sustainable anymore. People, it's already, the ratio is off, right? Like, people are submitting way more papers than we can actually review. So people, it's gotten crazy. And with AI, it's like exacerbated now. This whole thing that I talked about, speed, people can produce high quality at high speeds now. We are no match for that. And so eventually, this is my prediction, take it with a grain of salt, eventually we won't publish papers anymore. Like, I'm sorry, this is like a relic of the past. I say, like, maybe for the next, did the microphone die? Thank you so much. Okay, this is better. So eventually, what will happen is, I don't think we're going to do it's going to take a while. Academia is slow, right? So we'll still publish paper for the next little while. But I think like 10, 15 years down the line, we won't publish papers anymore. It's already, the newer papers in the Elsevier journals, you need to have like a cool video with it. I don't know if you ever did a video summary of your paper, it's really fun. So you need to have like that little high level, and you have to do the talking points if you submit in some of those higher level journals. Maybe not so much in your field, but like there's a lot of fields out there that basically have that short form summary, even on top of your abstract, where you just have a bunch of bullet points for the lazy people that don't want to read the full paper. They can just go through the bullet points. So what's going to happen is we're going to have like a notebook LM-like system of basically all of our lab's research output. I think that's where we're headed. Or maybe all the field, like maybe something like Kai will have like that database. As you know, ACM is going open, right? 1st of January, all of ACM published research is available openly. Everything's open source. It's called open source, but you know what it is. It's like they're charging us more. So with your conference fees and all of that stuff and your institutional fees, you're going to have to pay for it. But everyone else, and this is good, so everyone else can access all ACM papers. This is the Association of Computing Machinery, for those of you that don't know, are going to be available to the public. And so that also means, I mean, LLMs are already being trained on those research papers, but because they're open, it's even easier to train your LLMs on that. And so what's going to happen eventually is I think we'll have those specially trained LLMs, those knowledge bases in our fields that we can submit stuff to, and that will just do it. I don't know how we're going to change the incentive system somehow, because it's the death of the author, right? If you're working with anyone in the humanities, this has been lamented before, that basically the things that maybe for some of you are the reason why you are a researcher is because you're looking for fame and glory and all these wondrous things about being this highly published author in a field. I think that's eventually going to go away because of the nature of knowledge work, because all of that is changing right now, right? So we're going to have to find some way to have individual accreditation, because I think we're all going to become part of this mass of knowledge body that's being produced. And feel free to challenge me on that after this, but I think that's where we're headed, really. Because it gets so much easier to retrieve and work with knowledge in a way like that. And we're just, the traditional way of reading a paper, even if you look at the reading scores of the younger generation, has, I think, halved in the last 5 years. TikTok generation, right? The reason why I went on social media, literally, is, yeah, sure, I wanted to build a business, but also because I felt like my research is great, but it's sitting in papers, so the public cannot get it. So, you know, I went on social media before LMs came along, so back then it was a real challenge to try and translate your academic lingo into publicly digestible lingo at 8th grade reading level so that people could understand it. Now it's easy. It's just a prompt away. You're just like, this is my paper, PDF. Can you output that in high-level talking points at 8th grade reading level? Done. You got basically your draft ready to send to your communications officer. And that's the thing. Like, that's the kind of stuff that people read online. And that's, unfortunately, you know, the way that we have to do this kind of research communication. So this is interesting because we don't have validation framework. This was a total sidetrack, by the way. If you're still reading the slide, you're like, none of this is on the slide. But it's kind of like around this thing of what we're struggling with, which is, okay, so what validation do we then have for AI, specifically when we're, you know, not having this systematic quality control that we had in the past when everything was humanly done, because all of these AI LLMs are black boxes, right? So how do we deal with the nature of black boxes that are doing a lot of the interpretive work for us? So with AI augmentation, we threaten the subtle understanding that defines excellent player research, right? And again, this is quite interesting because this gives us an idea of the qualitative coding, to come back to that, and whether or not qualitative coding is as accurately done by the AI as human researchers. So as you can see, there's already a lot of studies out there. And if you're wondering about the tool I used here, this is called Consensus. This is another one of those AI tools. Those of you dabbling with AI systematic literature reviews might have come across Elicit or Consensus or SciSpace even. Those are the three big ones, I'd say, where literally this is generated in 5 minutes, right? Like, or 6 minutes is how long it took. And it basically did the entire system. It even generated a Prisma diagram for me. So literally did the entire systematic review in a matter of minutes. And it just gives us a big high-level overview here in terms of what's actually being published, how it's being rated. And of course, all of it is recent because only recently did we have those studies on AI with qualitative coding. And so you can see there's actually a lot of disagreement. So we have 9 papers. So the majority of papers is actually saying that AI really doesn't have that interpretive depth. But there's a lot of studies saying that, yeah, you know, it can match it as long as it's for the broad theme. So a lot of people or these are qualitative researchers, are saying for the broad binning, you can absolutely use an LM, but then you still have to have the human in the loop to do the nuanced interpretation, and the clustering of the themes can change, right? Because again, if you run a query on the same qualitative data multiple times, an LLM will do what? It will generate different sets of codes. So I don't know if you've tested this before, but there is it's not always homogeneous. So you still, as a human, if you do this a couple of times, you still have to kind of come up with a set of super themes, if you want. So the interesting, and this is from a study that was really like one of the first that really looked at exploring AI for qualitative analysis, and specifically ChatGPT in this case, and this was GPT 4.0, I think, in this particular case. So of course, this is a thing. The models generate so quickly or update so quickly that as soon as the study is published, it's basically outdated because the next model is, like I think with Gemini 3, we're getting really, really close to being much, much better with that. So the interesting thing is what this author writes is actually that there's a tendency for the responses to be more descriptive than interpretive, but also says you can find a similar error. So he looked at these discrepancies and said, yeah, sure, humans are more nuanced, but you'd say it also depends on the training of the coder, because if you have a low kappa, like a high level of disagreement with your coders, what you would do as a PI or as a professor, you would go back to your research team and you would have these discussions discussions basically to train people better, to harmonize, to come up with a better level of agreement. Well, guess what? You can do the same thing with a GPT, right? So basically what he says, you know, it wouldn't have been any different if this portion of the analysis % had been conducted by another human coder rather than an AI assistant, because like a lot of the studies are just looking at AI assistants out of the box, but they're not looking at what if you go back and then you train the AI and you work inside of a LLM project or something like that, or if you even fine-tune the model. Again, you'd very likely come to matching rates of human coding at that stage, because there's also a bias in the way that humans interpret that qualitative data. So this is interesting, right? Of course, we're not going to get rid of humans in the loop for quite a while. But the interesting thing is there's still, all of the studies are arguing for a human oversight somehow. And so this is my framework. Take it with a grain of salt. And again, this is not a framework in terms of like, should you use AI or not? I'm assuming you're using AI. This is the baseline, right? Sure, there's lots of reasons not even to use AI in the first place, and those are completely valid. I hear you. Some people are just against it, and that is fine. This is assuming you're using AI to do some of this work. What kind of things should you be aware of? So the first thing is, of course, to go under tier 1. So this is like tiers of how extreme your AI use should be. So tier 1 is basically when you're handling something that has mandatory human review or doesn't use AI at all, right? So in this case, if you're coding of accessibility barriers, or if you're doing discrimination reports, toxicity in gaming, this kind of stuff, I would use AI very, very lightly. I don't think it interprets some of the nuanced, like even game speak, as much as you would want it to. There's a lot of stuff that gamers say that don't actually mean the thing that you think it means. So the LM will always interpret it on natural language text, and it will not understand game speak that's just an egg-on in that specific scenario, and it might code it as something toxic, but it might not be toxic in the context. So a lot of the times it will lack that context, it's not nuanced enough. So in that case, absolutely, I wouldn't use an LM. If you're doing anything with minors data, so anyone that's not of full age, I would never feed that to bring that anywhere close to an LM. This is stuff that needs to be handled completely separately. Interpretation of ambiguous negative feedback that might indicate game-breaking bugs. This goes into the same direction that I said earlier for accessibility and discrimination stuff, because somebody might overreact to something, and you might have, this is specifically addressed for games user research companies, you might have something there where you want to take an action on that, but it's not actually necessary to take an action because it's not actually a game-breaking feature, but the LM might indicate it's a game-breaking feature because they overestimate the importance of it, again, based on game speak. Cross-cultural research, right, where findings where you have some sort of cultural bias, right? So let's say there's, I don't know, I've just been here for a day, I'm sure there's something in the Italian culture that's like very, very common that you guys just do, and nobody would think something of it. It's just like a way Italians play games. I don't know what it is. You probably do know. I'll check with Simone later if there's something, a very Italian play style. I don't know. Like Canadians are impossibly polite, yeah? So maybe we'll say sorry for like something that somebody else wouldn't even care about, like in a video game. So this actually permeates Canadian culture. So this is a very interesting thing because you would find this kind of cultural sorriness or apologetic kind of stuff in the way that Canadians would play games. So maybe there's something similar in Italian culture where, I don't know, my impression, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's like Italians are very like energetic, so there might be something like you play in a more energetic way. I don't know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there might just be something according to that playstyle that's maybe more energetic. But this is something, you know, obviously I'm bringing in my cultural bias here, and LM would have maybe a different cultural bias based on what data it's trained on. So there's a risk here, right? Like there's a risk of over-interpreting based on the bias. And so novel constructs, of course, this is very interesting. If you want to use an LM to create the most innovative game design, you likely won't be able to do that. Just like if you want truly innovative ideas. So a lot of people say use LMs for brainstorming, and yes, I'm absolutely okay with that. But the thing is, the thing that the LM will provide for you is basically the jumping off point. Your brain still has to do that next leap because LMs just average out the data, right? Like they just basically give you the best prediction on existing data. So all they will do is open up a can of things that you, or a lens of you that you might have not looked into in terms of an area that might be interesting. But you still in your brain have to do, okay, so what could be a way that I could move away from that, that could be novel, that could be a new interpretation. And of course, yes, you can prompt LMs in that way. You can use six thinking hats and Edward de Bono's methods, and you could instruct an LM to give you some of those prompts in a way that then your brain would make those associations much easier. But by standard, it wouldn't work that way. And then tier 2, which is a stratified sampling review. So here, you basically have some sort of inductive analysis where AI generates codes from raw data. You know, this is done with some sort of medium level of access to the LM. If you're looking at player motivation and engagement research, and you're using validated but context-dependent constructs, you can use an LM to interpret some of that. The more rules you have in place, the better it will work. So the more constructs you have, the more defined constructs you have, the better it will work for you. If you're doing competitive game feedback analysis where gaming literacy bias is probable, then again, you kind of have to look at where does it fit, where does it not fit, how can I make that interpretation there. And then, of course, longitudinal research across game updates where temporal consistency matters. If you want temporal consistency, it's much harder to do that in an LLM to understand those timelines. Again, it's getting better and better with Gemini 3. You have large context windows, you have a large understanding of sequences. As long as you have like a well-structured data set, a JSON file or even like a well-structured CSV file, usually will work quite well within that tier. And then the other tier, and this is kind of where we're going into, this is something that could probably be done by agents, so semi-automated reviews for you. So to some level, deductive coding with established codebooks. If a codebook is completely, again, this is basically like a set of rules that's already established so that you could do sentiment analysis, you could do feature categorization. An LLM could definitely help you with that, so it could really advance you at that level. Or if you're aggregating statistical summarization of player metrics, we talked about that during coffee today already, that now companies are using basically a simulation of player behavior to generate these heat maps to have an idea of where in the level is a player likely going to go. So yes, that is still not going to be comprehensive, but I think it's going to get you to 80%, 90% to that level where you can make a decision about level design or game design based on that simulation of player behavior. So this is definitely something I think that is possible. Translation of standardized surveys, instruments. Again, if you have a standardized survey scoring, if you have Likert scales, anything like that, yeah, sure, you can run that through an LM, no problem. Content moderation of low severity policy violations. So that automated content is actually already being put into place in some game chats, chat rooms, or ways that you can interact with them. So where it is just checking for certain contexts and keywords. Again, all depends on the amount of training that you've done for that specific model. But this is really something that is quite accurate. And because of fast models like Gemini Fast, it can happen in real time too. I don't know if many of you are using AI dictation. This has changed my productivity. I guess I didn't have that in my tools at the beginning. But I use a tool called Super Whisper, and I've used Whisper Flow. I actually use Whisper Flow a lot on my phone. So Super Whisper and Whisper Flow are two tools that are basically like, back in the day when there was dragon speech dictation or whatever. So I had a colleague working in the medical field, and they dictate a lot of reports. And so he was using Dragon Naturally Speaking, that's what it was called. And my God, it was, from an HCI perspective, horrible UI. I don't know if anyone from Dragon is listening, but my God, that was a bad product. It was very slow. And so basically what's happening with AI, like, this is now absolutely insanely fast. So basically, not only does it do the transcription, but you can then, for Super Whisper and Whisper Flow, you can pick your model. So you can say, I want to do, Gemini or whatever. And the models are fast enough that then you will not just do the transcription, but also the cleanup. So I could have like a long monologue and have ums and ahs and like counterpoints or whatever, and it would just give me the cleaned up transcript. And literally, I can dictate the introduction section of my paper that way. It is absolutely amazing. So this is definitely something where I think, AI is really caught up in terms of real-time speech editing, that it can also do real-time speech monitoring and real-time speech moderation. So now for people using voice chat in games. And where is that interesting? Of course, for minors playing video games, right? Like we have a huge problem in the gaming community with kids entering voice chats that are potentially toxic. There's a grand idea right there. We should look into that. Where you can do this content moderation with that AI augmentation level. So the big question is, of course, as we're entering that field and as AI is kind of taking our jobs in a way, it also is opening up new opportunities, but new risks as well for the way that you still need to learn how to code. Let's say you still need to learn how to do thematic analysis, but you also still need to learn how to do like statistics yourself. You still, as a human, need to understand the process. So specifically in graduate training, where we're trying to train new researchers how to do stuff, there should always be the restriction, and trust me, this is becoming a problem because, again, I'm looking at my new grad students entering right now. Your generation probably, I'm looking in the, and sorry, but this is my estimation, that everyone here is not in the first year of grad school. I think people, is anyone here in the first year of grad school? I think everyone is already like a little bit more advanced. Maybe some of you just started. But So what's really happening is that next generation that's going to enter grad school in the next years, they're probably an AI-first generation. So they have already used ChatGPT for their undergrad, and so they bring that expertise into grad school, right? So I basically have to untrain them in that moment to do the first pass without the AI, to actually understand that critical judgment first for yourself. Because only if you understand that are you actually able to prompt for it properly. So there is no streamlined way to jump the pain, I guess, in that way. Everyone needs to go through that pain of having gone through that labor-intensive process at least once to understand that. And then you can do team calibrations, then you can use AI as a co-coder, then you can rotate audit roles to critically review AI codes, and you can have that in your team, and maintain a log of AI failures for team learning and training. So, you know, that is really the thing to foster as we're trying to train the new generation of researchers that is trying to understand how all of this works. And then, of course, to understand when do I reject AI augmentation. This is a little bit like tier 1 that I said earlier. You need to have an understanding when are the topics too sensitive. Now, of course, by law in the EU, anytime you have personal information, again, keep it away from an LLM, because you don't know if any of this is being used for training data. The only data that, if any, you should be experimenting with is completely anonymized data. So as soon as it's not anonymized, it doesn't go up, right? Like, that's just the law. You're breaking the law if you don't do that. So just be aware of that. But then the other thing is also research involving trauma, harassment, or mental health is generally too sensitive, so I'd be very careful in the way I'm using LMs for that. Maybe a local version of it, but I'd be very, very careful. Innovative game genres, we already talked about that. You know, there's not a lot of AI domain knowledge for meaningful interpretation. If you're using really new game mechanics or trying something completely new, AI will not know what to do with that. It might actually flag some of your new mechanics as a failure or give you design feedback that this is a bad idea to do that. But this is actually where innovation happens. You need to play around. It would probably have criticized Nintendo's Wii controller back in the days and like, this is not a good game controller, because AI would have based its judgment on existing game controllers, right? So that innovation would probably never have happened. So if you're at the cutting edge of something, be aware that you probably want to reject the AI augmentation, right? So this is where critical independent thinking is really important. And then, of course, lower source languages. If you're doing something with very localized languages like indigenous languages, Swahili, Welsh, maybe if you're in Wales, in those areas, those languages are not trained in LLMs, right? So if you're looking at a more low resource community there, then you cannot really use LLMs for that kind of analysis. And of course, if you're doing regulatory research, then you have to have audit trails, you have to have human explainability, so in those cases it's really not a good way to use that. And of course, participatory research, participatory design, there are a lot of people that are looking into this kind of space. Can we do something there with co-creation with an AI? And people are trying that out, but I don't think it's there yet, that innovation is not there yet. So when to use AI and how to validate and where human judgment is essential. So this is the kind of gist of the heart of it. This is the part where everyone snoozes out because it's a huge table. But this kind of gives you an idea of like where I think the human insight is needed and where it's not needed. But it's basically summarizing what I've just given to you in an outline. This is sort of my table of where is it appropriate in a games user research context that we can use some of that. And it kind of gives you an overview in terms of the task types that we face in games user research, the sensitivity of the data, the complexity of the data or of the task, and the typical AI use, right? So something like survey cleaning, data aggregation, that's a routine task, there's low data sensitivity. That's definitely something where you don't need a lot of human oversight, right? But if you do an interview transcript, you still need oversight, you still need to do some sort of spot checking, you need to understand, is there something going on that could be hallucinations, and you want to make sure that that rate is kept low. A lot of the times it's better to use something with a low hallucination rate like Notebook LM if you do these sort of qualitative approaches to that data than to just feed it to a general LM, as the hallucination rates are much higher. And yeah, I already gave all of those examples, minors, accessibility, and so forth. This is just an example of what Google can do for you now. So I had this like bullet point slide, and there's a button in Nano Banana now on Google Slides that you can just click that says beautify slide. I clicked that button and turned my bullet points into this beautiful little slide. So you can see, you know, Nano Banana, the image models are also kind of doing that. But this is basically what we want to have. We want to have a transparency protocol. And I think this is super important because I think all of us, or I'd say at least like 90% of researchers are already using AI. We're just not disclosing it. We're kind of like our students that way. We're just like, you know, like we're using it for our task. But and why? Why is that? Because of the studies that I showed you earlier. Because as soon as you say you're using AI, people will brand you. They will say, I don't think that's good. And people will actually put you in a category of AI users, right? But I think it's really, really important that we get away from that predefined judgment that everyone, according to these studies, seems to have, because as soon as we label something as AI generated, there is a downside of that, right? Like there is a judgment that's happening, but it is super important going forward if we want to maintain quality and accuracy, to just disclose this information properly and not create that bias. So I guess it kind of moves into becoming an AI-first sort of research community where people actually understand, and I know AI-first is such a industry lingo term because all the companies are AI-first. I don't know if you read this. Google is an AI-first company now. So it's like AI-first. Anyways, but the idea is basically like that it's just assumed it's part of your natural workflow, right? Like, it's assumed that this is just something that is happening. And yes, again, we specifically in research, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of discussions there where people say, no, I reject this outright because of, again, the ethical stances. And that's perfectly fine, but it is counterproductive in terms of like, it is just used in a way that we've used similar tools before. And I know AI is more than a tool, that's a different discussion, but we still have to go through this of saying, okay, we're logging it, we're logging how we're doing it, we're logging what exact model we're working with it, we're maintaining separate archived versions and logs so that we can go back, that we have an audit trail, and we justify the use by recording the reasoning for why we're using AI in this specific context. And this is why I gave you that table, that framework, that you can say, well, this is a high complexity work or whatever, this is why AI is useful here. And specifically, this table also will give you criteria for evaluating whether or not AI is influencing the research rigor that you're doing, right? And so if you're talking about the authenticity of your insights, then you also want to say, well, if we have AI-generated finding, we want to get to that same level of depth and originality of human analysis, right? We don't want to have sort of templated responses. At least if we have templated responses, it will be at the same level of templated responses that we would use in the human-generated, human-produced reporting. So this is really, really important. And then AI output must preserve complexity, tone, and the tacit knowledge that we find in rich human coding. And that is currently like very hard. It's still not there for a lot of the thematic stuff anyways. We don't want it to be shallow, right? So we always want to reprompt and prompt further to go deeper in the system. We want to document the validation process. So like what kind of benchmarking are we doing? How are we generating as many steps outside of the black box that is AI so that we can reproduce at least that outer part of it. And again, this is assuming that even something as rigorous as a systematic review is flawed in a way, as I said in the beginning, that even the systematic review is based on a database and it's based on some publisher-controlled entity, right? So even as much as we're telling ourselves we're being super systematic, the thing is still under a huge amount of change over time. So you will not be able to find explicitly the same results that you had in like 2 or 3 years before that. So that's something, it's very iffy to go from, okay, everything is super documented to there is now a level of uncertainty that has entered the research world that we're not comfortable with yet as researchers because, again, it's counter-indicative of the rigor that we're interested in. And maybe just as a last bit here to kind of look at is also like the error in the hallucination handling, right? So if we find there's a lot of hallucinations, we have to flag that. We have to rethink our AI use in that particular scenario because that's the last thing that we want to do is hallucinated papers. But we can already see it across fields because a lot of researchers are using AI to generate their papers. And this is unfortunately part of the system because it is so rewarded by many people to have a lot of publications. That's just part of the research game, right? And so unfortunately, there are a lot of institutions out there and a lot of researchers out there that are using AI. Famously, the mouse penis. I don't know if you've seen this image. This went viral on social media like a year ago, where people were using Midjourney to generate the figures in the image, and there was this weird sort of cut through of a mouse, and then there was this huge testicle coming out of the mouse. That's just Google it, you'll understand what I mean. And there were a couple of other, then the Petri dish spoons looked like actual spoons, and it looked like somebody was actually eating oatmeal instead of a cell culture thing like that. But anyways, and that paper got published. Of course, it got retracted because everyone went on the fence about this kind of stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that's happening. And if you know Retraction Watch, I definitely recommend looking into Retraction Watch, I think .com or .org, which is a famous website that is actually tracking the use of this response was generated by LLM, or I hope you like the output of, or just these general sentences that you find in standardized LLM output that have made their way in research papers. And I think we're like 500 papers and counting, like even more these days. It's really rapidly. And people are just sloppy because this is just being sloppy at that point. You're literally just copying and pasting the output instead of the little bit of change that you'd have to do. This is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but this is really the general thing is with AI use, it'll get you there 80%. You still have to do the 20%. And if you know the Pareto principle, you know usually the last 20% is the hardest work. So unfortunately, you still have to do the hardest work yourself, which is like the critical thinking part, the human editing part and all that stuff. But a lot of the groundwork, it can get you through. And this is really how we keep the human touch, manually reviewing the core data samples, comparing human coding with AI coding, looking that the final insights and the recommendations are formulated by us. Sure, you can formulate it based on the output that AI gave you, but you still need to formulate it. You still need to own that output, right? Like you need to take that responsibility. And of course, flagging all ambiguous or new player comments that are required for human review. This is specifically for the example of player comments, but works with any kind of comments if you in qualitative research. And clearly stating what parts of the research relied on human work versus AI work, and being comfortable enough to do that. I think it still take us a couple of years until we get comfortable doing that publicly, but we need to get to the point where that's okay. And that kind of wraps it up for us today. Thank you very much for your time and attention and listening to me rant about AI for an hour. So I'm definitely open for questions, and I thank you very much. Mille grazie for coming to my talk today.
Thank you, Lennart. So given the topic, I think, thank you. We will have, I hope we will have a long discussion now.
Thank you very much. Well, really, really interesting, intriguing. I just to disclose my position, I'm halfway between your position and a very skeptical position about AI.
Yeah.
And I think you touch two important aspects. One is the ethics of research.
Yeah.
And one that you just barely touched is the ethics in teaching, or I mean, the use in education, let's say, in general. Yeah. And I think that the two are pretty different. So for what concerns ethics in research, for me, we should be really careful about emphasis on efficiency. I agree that in some cases, for example, I use it a lot for English correction. I mean, my English is really terrible, so I can improve my English. So this is a good efficiency because English speaking is not meaningful to my work.
Yeah, exactly.
In other cases, for example, reading a paper, I'm really skeptical about use of notebook LLM because, again, I think that the capability, there is something inherently meaningful in research in the ability of reading the paper.
Yeah.
So delegating this to AI, I feel that is the bad side of efficiency. But and you touched a little bit with the when we talk about the qualitative analysis, which is very similar. On the side of teaching and education, again, for me, lacking or missing or losing the ability of reading paper is really, really dangerous for the new generation. And so this is really beyond. So it's not about efficiency, it's really lack of meaningful.
Yeah, it's very important because I actually thought about that quite a bit too, because this is something I've already faced in the last couple of years, even before AI. It's very hard for my early master students, even like first year PhD students, to actually convince them to read papers. This is like, aside from AI, this is the TikTok generation, right? So the learning modes are different. They're much more used to visual stimuli and like just a different way of consuming information. And text consumption is just not the primary mode of consuming information anymore.
As teacher, isn't our actual responsibility to try to avoid going much along this path?
Yeah.
I know, I agree perfectly.
No, I agree with you. There is definitely, so at the start, I think I was very much of your mindset where I thought, okay, you know, this is really something that's going to go away if you don't. And I'm still making, like for PhD students, I'm still making them read papers, right? Like there's no way around it. You got to understand, because right now it's like input output, right? Like if you never read a paper, you cannot produce a paper. Like, so if your goal is to produce a paper, you need to read a paper. That's just natural, right? You need to understand the way this works. You need to understand how text is constructed. So it is your bread and butter at that stage. But again, thinking more like the next 10 years, thinking more ahead, what if papers are not the mode of information anymore? Because I do think eventually that's going to go away. So, or maybe not going to go away, but it's going to be sidelined. There's going to be at least two different modes. There's maybe still the standard archival mode of producing text and all of that information. But I do think as these tools are becoming easier, it becomes easier to create content in different ways so that maybe research content will be produced and delivered, and the dissemination process will be different than just our traditional model of papers. Because, like, how old is that? That's like 50, maybe 100 years old. I don't even know when papers started, but it's like early 1930s, maybe it's kind of when the first research paper. I mean, maybe earlier for some, like if you go all the way back to the Greeks, then sure, like the philosophers' ideas were also written down. So you could trace it all the way back to that. But I do think there's definitely a change happening, and so I think at the very least we'll end up with a hybrid model. So there will probably be the traditionalists that will still publish papers in a traditional way. But I do think as these LMs are taking over, and also as they're enabling us to produce content much easier. So this is another thing. I don't know if you tested Gamma AI or even with Notebook LM now, it is very easy to create your lecture notes. So this is something, I guess, where this is regarding your other question about like how does it work in terms of ethics for teaching. So I used to be, when I was an assistant prof, and I used to have to teach like a completely new course. This was a big challenge for me because I spent like all night obsessing over slides. And if I would have had a tool like Notebook LM where I could just upload sort of my thoughts and like even speak into it, and then it would just take care of the process of creating the slides for me, oh my God, I would have actually like slept like more hours than I did in the end. And yes, maybe you could talk about, okay, but there's a process of learning something by creating the slides. But I'm actually finding it quite, specifically an app like Gamma app, I don't know if you've tried that. This is an app where you basically prompt your slides together. So you feed it your talking points, it will generate the slides for you, and it literally doesn't have, it's like PowerPoint, but it doesn't have any design buttons. So you can just select the text area and re-prompt that text area, and it'll change that text, or it'll generate images that are fitting for you. And as I'm playing with that, I'm just looking at it as like, this is so much faster than my process used to be, right? So I do think it's interesting because it just kind of changes the way that we're producing this kind of educational content using these new tools. And yeah, it doesn't alleviate us from the responsibility of actually understanding what's out there, and maybe it makes it harder for us. This is an interesting thing, maybe it's something worth studying as well. Are we as good as learning? Because as you know, learning, like teaching something is the best way to learn something, I guess, right? Because if you have to teach a course on area X, you have to learn that thing first yourself so that you feel confident enough to teach it. So yes, that being a long-winded process of reading the textbook and then putting that textbook into bullet points, the way we traditionally used to do it, was a good way to learn something. So now that this is much faster, I can just upload the PDF and just say, okay, now I need, you know, introduction lecture about this chapter, and boom, it's done in 10 minutes. Will I still be, the hypothesis would be, of course I'm not learning as much, because it's like there's no critical back and forth with the text, right? So the question really is, like, how will it influence the way that we learn and how deep we learn, I guess, the materials as well. So I do feel that that's the friction right now. There's a friction between efficiency, productivity, and deep learning and deep understanding, which, yeah, we haven't quite figured out. But I think like the golden spot is somewhere in the middle, but I don't know what that middle looks like yet. It's like, how much is good enough, basically, for deep learning? Yeah.
Are there other questions?
I was very interested in the capabilities that you speak about, Super Whisper and Whisper 4.
Yep.
And I'm referring specifically to the possibility to customize or maybe like prompt the AI on how to edit the transcript, right?
Yeah.
Regarding these capabilities, and considering a context in which you can apply changes to the text post-production, not really in real time.
Yeah.
Are Whisper, Super Whisper, Whisper Pro here better than other tools like transcripts?
Transcriptionist, yeah. Yeah, so yes, yeah, they are. So it depends on what you want. So transcriptionist or Granola, like some of these transcriptions tools, they are basically giving you the full accurate transcript. So you still have that, because you need that text data. So anytime you do qualitative operations on text data, you want to have accurate source data, right? So for those, you cannot circumvent that, because you need that first pass of actually turning the voice into written text that you have available. And yeah, like how accurate is that text? I'd say transcriptionist is something like a 95, 99% accuracy rate. I barely find anything wrong with the output that's being produced. So that's pretty good, right? Like it's the same. Even if we used ref.com, I think it's actually more accurate than ref.com, which is back in the day where you'd pay $10 for somebody somewhere to transcribe your protocol, right? And they would insert inaudible text or something like that. And I find like some things where I would probably not audibly understand what was being said, the AI will understand it, because it can make sense of what would likely be in there, even if the utteration, the pronunciation is not very clear in that moment because of the context of the sentence. So I think that is very good. But then in terms of efficiency, and you're talking about the real-time thing, I think so. That is based on the models that you select. So in Super Whisper and Whisper Flow, you can select basically if you want to use a fast, and it will tell you the trade-off, right? So you can use Gemini Fast, which is almost real-time, basically. It happens instantly, but it will make more mistakes. It will make more errors because it's a fast model. It's natural, right? You can use Gemini 3 Pro, and you can use some of the slower models, and then it'll wait like 20 seconds until everything is processed. But it will be perfect. There will be no errors in your transcription. And you can do all the querying and the stuff afterwards. So that still works that way. You can actually, in these things, you can, just like you would in ChatGPT and all of the Frontier LLMs, you can create a custom project that is like when you're only in this app. So let's say you're doing a transcription while you have Google Docs open or while you have Microsoft Word open. It will understand that you're in that context window, and it will apply a custom prompt to that context window. So you could pre-spice your prompt as in like, okay, I just need the bullet points of what I'm dictating to you right now. Or I'm writing my CV, and so you can narrate your CV or whatever, and it will actually format it in the right way without you pressing any other buttons, because it will know, okay, whenever you're in Word, you're doing a CV or something like that. Yeah. So that's powerful, I think, yeah.
Is it preserving also a big context, a temporal context, in a way like if in the first part of the speech you're referring to specific like aliases or other way to refer to things, you might use them later in the text, or
yeah. It can understand the context, even if you're talking about a concept at the beginning, and then you're actually defining that context later, that concept later in the text, because you're just like, oh, AI, and then, oh, I didn't actually say what AI is, like 3 minutes into your talk. Well, artificial intelligence is understood as XYZ in this context. It will basically treat the entire, because again, it takes that 20 seconds, 30 seconds to process the entire text, right? So, and I'm saying 20 seconds, 30 seconds, because I think the maximum I've been dictating is like 10 minutes. So of course, I haven't tried it for like an hour of dictation. It'll probably, the more audio data it has to process, the longer it will run, of course, right? But most of the times, the way that you use these apps, you'll be dictating something, because you'll have push to talk, right? So you'll just push the button for 10 minutes, transcribe it, leave the button, and then you're thinking about the next thing you're going to say, and in that time it will already transcribe it, right? So this is how I write most of my documents and emails now. It's just basically, I'm going to say something, then I'm going to think about it more, I'm going to say something, think about it more, and at the end of the day, it'll just stitch it all together when I'm done. So does it as it's happening, which is useful.
Thank you. Any other question or comment? Simone.
Hello.
Hello.
So yeah, as you know, game user research is something which is something really recent, because in the past we didn't think about doing game user research while developing video games. We just developed games and then we check whether they were fun or not. I mean,
Yeah. By recent, you mean 20 years old now?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's
I was still a child, so yeah. But in any case, yeah, there's a difference between game user research in industry and in academia. I mean,
yes,
we try to search for a power analysis, so a classic sample size to find our data reliable, and while in industry they find like 20 participants and try to test the game mechanics. And
yep.
the other difference is that we can try the whole game, because serious games usually they are partially games, as you can say. While in industry, the games are very long, so they can try the games for maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, so they can try the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think the implementation of AI techniques and AI tools can increase on one side the way we are doing game user research in industry also? Because, I mean, as you said, we can try to simulate how users will behave, and this can extend also how we measure the user experience and the mechanics of efficiency in that part. But however, in industry, we don't know whether they have a knowledge on how AI tools will work and works usually. While as a researcher, I mean, I have a systematic approach in analyzing an AI tool, and then I apply it properly. So what do you think are the differences in using AI tools in the two different approaches, so in industry and academic game user research, and if it can improve how we are doing game user research in the industry field this way, and whether we have finally good games again?
I don't know about that, because that's a different problem. That's because we're stuck in capitalism, and as long as capitalism is about making the most amount of money with something, we're going to have crappy games because everyone's trying to optimize their revenue, right? And so, and if you looked at some of that feedback of the Comet browser and the RSS, because it was Clash of Clans or one of those free-to-play games, and everyone is literally complaining about they're monetizing it too much, right? And I think that's a thing where the company's saying we're willing to not fix that because we like the money, everyone likes the money, and so then they're going to ignore that. And that's already like, even without AI tools, they're going to just ignore the games the researchers' suggestion and prioritize making the money. So that's a different problem. But is the industry maybe more open to using AI tools? I think so, because this is one of the big things that I have to teach our master students when they're leaving and they're taking an industry job and they're used to academic timelines and turnaround where we have like half a year to write a paper and all this fancy stuff that we do in academia. This doesn't fly in industry. It's like you got 2 weeks to produce the research report, or you got like maximum 1 month. Avanti, 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 right? Like make it happen quickly. And so then AI is, unfortunately, is feeding into that, because now you can actually make it good enough. Because a lot of the times in industry, good enough is good enough. You do not need, and this has even happened before, like the Cronbach's alpha levels we use in academic researchers doesn't matter that, but like, this is from one of my former students when he joined the industry, and he was actually telling me about this. So I tried to explain to my boss what that actually means about the validity of the data, and he flat out did not care. He just cared about the numbers and the charts and that there's a trend in one direction, and he didn't care whether or not the data is valid. It just needed to look good on paper, and he needed to make an argument. And so this is one extreme example, of course, right? Like there's other bosses out there, and yes, games user research maybe has gotten more academic over the last 20 years, and it was a little bit more hand-wavy at the beginning, because this was 15 years ago when that story happened. But I do think there's still a need for outcomes need to be produced quickly, much more than there is in academia, because as we mentioned before, in academia, everything's much more about quality, right? Like we're very much inherent in quality, and rigor is the most important thing. And that's fine. But in industry, you have to ship things, right? Like you have to get things out there, and so quality is good, but there is a trade-off of quality, and I think so. There's a higher willingness to accept AI as a way to get to that trade-off much quicker. And maybe, again, I don't want to put words in my colleague's mouth, but maybe there's more of an acceptance of like, okay, I'm willing to do that trade-off specifically. Excuse me. dry here.
Yeah, Massimo.
I perfectly agree on your last statement about the industry up to cut corners, say.
Yeah.
But would you say the same for engineering building bridges? So isn't that it's sometimes strange that in some domains people require rigor, while in other we all acknowledge that is not so important?
I think that's very interesting because I think that's already what we're seeing. This is I think this goes beyond user research and games even, but we're already seeing a decline of rigor in engineering because a lot. I'm speaking as a guy that's German, so German engineering is the thing, right? Like Germans obsess. They have DIN standards and other things. They obsess until like the bridge is built perfectly and like it is all positive. Or like Switzerland, right? Like you have the watches and like the way the automatic movement has been done perfectly. But yeah, again, capitalism has brought us, if you want to sell to broader masses and produce more products quicker, there's always trade-offs. And this is interesting because it will happen to any sort of company over time. It will basically happen that at some point there will be that trade-off because they are willing to do this to make more money because it'll be more product. I guess this is sort of the dark side of it, right? But this is something that we're willing to accept and understand. I think as long as it's like a non-critical thing, I think our willingness to accept it is much higher. We're like, for example, take clothing, for example. The way clothes are made today versus like 50 years ago is very different, right? So clothes have become cheaper, fabrics have become cheaper. There's like this huge trade-off. And as Italians, I think all of you agree, I love Italy for the fabrics. Like a lot of Italians definitely know how to value fabrics, and there's a lot of really good clothes made in Italy because Italians value that a lot, right? Whereas other areas of the world, China, it might not be as important, and so like there might be a different trade-off. In terms of like, we just need a lot of this and it doesn't even need to last that long. And so, yeah, so some engineering stuff you really want it to last, but if you look at dishwashers and washing machines and stuff like that, it used to last 20, 30 years and now it lasts like 5 to 10 years maybe with the newer manufacturers. So I think it's interesting, yeah. So we have like less capable stuff. Even if you look at MacBooks and like Apple stuff, right? Like used to be top of the line and now like every 5 years you need a new MacBook because the old one's battery is dying or something. So I don't know. I think it's just the willingness to accept bad engineering has gone up, I think, over the years. And with AI, I think with AI, I think what we're going to see is because of this AI slop flooding everything, is the willingness to accept something of mediocre textual quality maybe even is also going up because, again, a lot of people don't care as long as like not labeled as AI generated. They're like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. But as soon as you label it, then it's like, no, not good anymore. So I think we're going to crave, as a lot of stuff becomes more industrialized in our communications maybe even, we're going to crave more authenticity. And so I think that becomes more important. So maybe there'll be a return to rigor across all areas over the next 5 to 10 years, just because a lot of people are cutting too many corners too quickly. And then that becomes devalued a lot. So I could see that happening. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, Joe.
Hello. Testing.
Hello.
1, 2, 3.
Joseph, nice to meet you.
I'm your student, and maybe there are some students in here as well too.
Yeah.
And going back to that comment about teaching, so I view it more as like a calculator. You teach people how to do the basic operators, and the AI tool is like the calculator essentially. Oh, there we go.
Closer to your mouth.
Okay, so I view AI as the calculator. So my question is, for students that are about to graduate or about to apply for jobs like faculty or game industry, what skills do you see like for coming to know?
This is super important because this is something I'm already seeing with our recent graduates. So as not all of you, but those of you that are getting close to graduation might know, the job market is absolutely horrific right now. Nobody's getting hired and everyone's getting let go. Specifically, you're in the area of UX and HCI. You might have seen this. It wasn't just Facebook and Google, but there was this massive layoff of UX positions over the last 2 years, and it's just getting worse. And part of it is the devaluing of the craft of UX. And of course, as we know, and I could have given a whole different talk about like how people are not wireframing anymore. People are vibe coding these days. So basically the step of wireframing of UX has disappeared because it's so easy to just vibe code an app, right? So UX workflows are changing as AI is integrated in all of these workflows. So the only advice that I really have for people entering the workforce is to be AI augmented. You know, whether or not you like it, this is what companies are looking for. And you're only going to put yourself as an advantage if you're not embracing that as part of your workflow. Because I do think what is happening, unfortunately, is, and I've actually seen that even in the family, like through people I know from high school and whatnot, that have been doing excellent work and also recently got let go because they just haven't caught up on AI quickly enough. And yes, it is a very stressful time because this is something that I actually feel that pressure as well. As somebody that I'm all about AI and I talk about AI publicly and I'm about AI on social media every day, and I feel like I'm catching up all the time because I'm like hustling to like know the latest cutting edge LLM innovations and whatnot. But it sometimes can feel really stressful just because of the pace of things is so quickly. But I think at the very least what you should do, if you want to kind of get a hold of it but still have an advantage on the job market, pick one of the frontier LLMs. So whether it's Gemini, Claude, or ChatGPT, maybe Grok if you're like a funky sort of cool guy kind of thing, because Grok's wild, like it's very different. But yeah, pick one of those three and get really good at using that for your specific workflows. Understand what projects are, understand what prompt engineering is, understand the value of context and feeding context to a prompt, and really leverage that as an intrinsic part of your workflows, because your workflows will be AI augmented as we're going into this world. And that's the problem. People are going to let go more people that are not integrating that because the people that are using it are going to be more efficient, unfortunately. So as companies are, and just think about it. I think about it from an entrepreneurial standpoint because I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I wouldn't be able to do my business without AI because I basically have all these AI co-workers now, my AI agents that do like my marketing for me and my price evaluation and stuff that I have no knowledge about. I could train AIs to actually give me that advice, right? I wouldn't be able to run any of that stuff without the help of AI. And so if I was to run a company and I had basically, I could invest in 2 people from the money that I just made with product sales and whatnot, then I would of course invest in people that can have that optimized workflow, that instead of hiring 1 person, I feel like I'm hiring 10 people because these people know how to use N8N and make.com, and they can chain different prompts together and stuff like that. I haven't even mentioned that because that's like basically what's going to happen in the next year. So this is another thing, right? Don't only become good at prompting, but also understand in how like these prompt chains work together. N8N is completely free, so you can learn it yourself. You can run it on a local server. This is definitely the go-to tool right now. Make.com and Zapier are paid versions, so that's something that you could try out as well. And the fun thing is I knew nothing about this. I learned that stuff with Perplexity and with Google teaching me how to do those workflows. And yes, there were a lot of hallucinations and dead ends in there, but it was much, much easier to learn it that way than any other way. So I learned AI agent automation using AI. So you can learn anything with AI these days, really, is kind of what it boils down to. So use AI as a learning tool for that kind of stuff, I would say, and definitely integrate it in your workflows, because yeah, if you want to have the edge on the job market right now, that's going to be your edge.
Follow-up question. We were talking about this on the bus too, I think. What are your thoughts about like just having an undergraduate degree with the current market? Yeah. So this is the problem that we have. The entry level is gone, and I lamented about that a year ago already. Was when it started happening. That's the reason why people are not getting jobs, because essentially what happens is all of the seniors are training up to know AI, and so a senior trained with AI basically replaces the entry level. And specifically, I don't know if you've witnessed when Gemini 3 was released and anti-gravity was released. I would 100% look into anti-gravity if you're somewhat into coding at all, because yes, Cursor is great, and so is Windsurf, and these coding tools, these are all AI augmented coding tools. So if you do any sort of coding, you should definitely do AI augmented coding, usually with a Claude model, Claude computer or something like that. I would definitely, anti-gravity is free. So this is an integrated IDE. So basically what it does is you can code together with your agent. So you can code in English language basically, and it will output the JavaScript or PHP or whatever for you. But then it will also start a local host, and it will run the thing in the server, and you can test it right there because it's a browser as well. So literally you can have a web application up and running in like 2 hours of learning anti-gravity. It is absolutely mind-blowing. So when I looked at that 2 weeks ago, I couldn't believe what is happening. So I think anti-gravity is going to be
really one of the standards for the next year for people that want to just take vibe coding to the next level. So, did I veer off that question?
Kind of like undergraduate degree.
Oh yeah, undergraduate. So do you still need an undergrad? No, you don't actually. Yeah, sorry, but that's the problem. Basically, you only need an undergrad if you want to have an academic career, because undergrad is going to lead into grad and so forth. But I think you can actually literally just learn AI in high school these days, and you can leapfrog an undergrad. Like if somebody is coming out of high school and knows agentic code, and this is, I know I'm kind of cutting my own tree here that I'm sitting on, but because I have a PhD, but I honestly think that's possible now, right? Like literally, this is the downside of AI, is that knowledge has become a commodity, right? So all of us like being super smart, but unfortunately, a high schooler can be super smart now too, as long as they know how to command smartness. This, of course, begs the question, you know, what if AI fails? What if, you know, this thing is not available then? So I guess it's the same question as somebody that was really good at a typewriter and then computers came along, and somebody that was really good at computer. I don't know if the comparison holds, but it's definitely something where somebody that has mastered AI technology out of high school will absolutely get your job before you graduate undergrad. So that's the reality of it. So that is problematic. And so is the master's even important right now? I also think that's like very problematic, because what the companies are seeing basically is like, I can get that same work done than that traditional qualification has guaranteed before, because it doesn't matter anymore, because that knowledge, that extra knowledge is just coming from that. So somebody that can quickly acquire and command that knowledge as part of their AI augmented workflow has the edge, unfortunately, right? It's tricky, yeah. So that's, I think, the workforce that we're looking at, and that, again, companies are living in a capitalist environment, so they're only caring about, unless it's like an altruistic company or something like an NGO or something like that, but any sort of company that's on the free market that's trying to maximize revenue is going to look at how can I maximize revenue without paying for the maximum workforce. It's a natural, like this has no emotional value for them. It's literally just like, how can I get maximum value out of minimum people? And that's where AI enters it. And yes, this is where all of the, and I think, of course, you know, you got to think that through a political, sociological lens as well. What this does is we're all going to be pissed about AI in 2 to 3 years down the line. So there might actually be AI wars or an AI revolution coming. So I'm seeing that as well as an opportunity, because as the majority of the workforce is getting laid off and less jobs are available for us, people are just going to have all that time to be upset. And it's like, basically what you're already seeing is going to be even more. So it's basically that the FANG companies, so in North America, that's what we call Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, whatever, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, thank you, Alphabet, I guess. But yeah, Google, so those are like the big, and if you look at the stock market, this is literally like, what, 80% of the stock market. And of course, people are looking at what's happening on the stock market as well. If you're looking at the concentration that's happening, is basically the majority of the revenue is a circle jerk right now. It's because it's NVIDIA giving the chips to the AI companies, and the AI companies giving the money to NVIDIA. And so it's just like a system that's financing itself with companies like OpenAI that is not even profitable. So there's this whole thing of money being like, it's fluff money. It's not existent money that's being generated and put out there in the world. And there's no real like outcome of all of that. And that's the problem, basically. What we're seeing is a centralization of some of very big companies that are making all the money, and smaller companies actually like struggling, and an entire company is disappearing because of that, right? And you already see it, like with every major AI announcement, there's a slew of companies that is now obsolete because the AI tool is now doing that thing that niche of that company was specialized in, and now the AI is just automating that entire thing. And so the company is really going to struggle, or they're going to have to shift it, which is why a lot of the smart tech companies basically shifted immediately to integrate AI as part of their output, because that was not an option to get an edge. That was literally survival at that point, just trying to stay relevant in the current market. Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
I don't know if there are other questions. I don't know if it's a question or a reflection, let's say.
Yeah.
Hearing all what you have presented, but also what has been said. So it is clear that a lot of tasks in research, but in all domains, basically, which are more, let's say, operational, practical, technical, can be done, supported by or completely by AI. Yeah. And this is happening. So yeah, I totally agree with you that in this sense, it is very important also from an educational perspective to make, young people, but also not so young people, able to exploit this.
Yeah.
At the same time, what you say and what I strongly believe now is there are still some important parts, critical thinking,
Yes.
imagination, creativity, which is not just generating an image, but disruptive, let's say, or groundbreaking ideas, and from which we are far to be achieved by AI or just by AI. And so my reflection is maybe in education, it is true. It's much important to make people able to exploit AI in a right and in a right way. But at the same time, we might decide that it's time also to focus on making them, champions or very, very good at critical thinking. So what makes the difference probably especially in a researcher, for a researcher or academic career? So this is what I thought. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distinguishing factor really will become how you use AI. So it's not anymore like if you use it or not, because if you don't use it, you're likely going to become irrelevant very, very quickly. So the question really is, what ethical standards are you putting up for the use? And yeah, like I think it's really important to be aware of like where's AI coming from, and like all of the water that's needed to cool the super processors, all of the minerals of the earth that are being farmed like crazy to make these chips in the first place. Like it's absolutely important to be aware and know what is happening with that, but that is not a reason to neglect the change from happening, right? Like, so I think, yes, it's you have to be educated about AI and the dangers and downsides of AI, but you also have to be educated on how to best leverage it for your own personal advantage. I think this is sort of the holistic education that we as universities have to do. So we absolutely have to educate people on the ethical downside of it, and also the economical things, like what we just said, the consolidation of power that is happening. Literally, Elon Musk bought a president. Like, hello? Like, okay, no. Can disagree with me on that if you're a Trump fan, but like Elon Musk bought a president because he has so much money. And so this is what's happening. So political systems are being influenced by people with a lot of money, and AI is exacerbating that sort of wealth generation. So it's a problem, right? So political, sociocultural issues are really important that we educate people on that. But then also what's happening is understanding the best ways to use it in a way that, again, we can still own the data and the interpretation and the augmentation and the work, right? So this is why I like the word augmentation, and I like the word cyborg and not robot, right? Like I call myself a cyborg researcher because it's not just my brain anymore, it's my brain and all of these AI brains doing the work at this time. But it just is part of the reality of being a cyborg researcher these days. It's it's just a way that your work is now augmented with these capabilities and capacities, and just a way of embracing that. And then, understanding, how to still be authentic with all of that, right? I think, and this boils down to language, if anything, because a lot of these things are language models, so a lot of it is text-based. And this was the biggest unlock for me, was untraining the model with the m-use and the constant antithesis. Antithetical parallelisms is basically the dead giveaway for an unfiltered LLM prompt. What is that? It's not about X, it's about Y. You've all seen it, it's everywhere, everyone is writing like that, everyone's saying that. And this is what we call, in terms of this is my tip, actually. Study a little bit of rhetoric. It will really, really give you an advantage of like interpreting LLM output, because you'll basically catch these rhetorical figures. And people talk about it as the invisible fingerprint that's happening in the language of an LLM, but this is definitely something that's happening. So antithetical parallelisms is the bread and butter of ChatGPT output, right? Like every sentence that you will have will be, it's not A, it's B. It's not about this, it's about that, right? Like it's these antithetical, these comparison constructs that is part of this invisible fingerprint. So and you can untrain that with elaborate prompts, of course, and the m-dash was like when I think GPT 3.5 came along, that really found its way in there. Everyone likes an m-dash. I like using an m-dash too, but obviously it's overusing the m-dash in its output. So you, again, have to untrain the use of that. And the words that you all know, like nuance is a word, and if you do research papers, it'll use the word nuance a lot, and it'll use delve. That was the first models, at least, use the word delve too much. and other certain marker words. And there's NIPS studies, just look into the NIPS proceedings that actually have the certain marker words, and the amount of papers that are using these words over time has obviously risen since the release of chatbots. So I think it's just an awareness of like what are these things doing to our language? How are these things like normalizing the way that we do output? And then you as an individual, how can you counteract that averagization, normalization of your work, right? Because I think this is definitely something that will set you apart as you're interacting with LLMs, if you know how to untrain some of that bad behavior of your digital intern that it has by default. So I think that really gives you an edge in using these tools. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes.
I want to ask you, what do you think about a possible process going on in several years from now of like a refactorization of category, like category that may be born in the academia and in other places of our society that are refer more to take an example of serious game, where we are considering serious game as an entity and not and games as another entity, and then we have something related to education that is covering that part, and we have this kind of clustering of knowledge and then research about these categories. I might imagine that in the future where we have those kind of brains that you referred before, maybe the LLMs themselves will suggest different categories or normalizing them in a way that maybe they're expressing different structure that are better for the LLM to reason with. Mm-hmm. And so do you expect something similar like that? And if so, do you expect something that is more like we as humans will manage fewer categories that are more grounded on our nature, what is like the constraint in the physical realm, and less on our knowledge, or maybe a more expansion of these categories? That's something that we need to align with.
Yeah, I think this is I think maybe one of the most relevant questions that we have to ask ourselves in this new AI era that we're entering, right? Because I think what you're referring to is basically what will happen is an average, everything is getting normalized. I think that's part of where this word slop comes from, that everything kind of feels like mush. Everything feels like oatmeal, basically. Everything is just like this bland thing of sameness that we're going to swim in. So I think this is specifically for us as researchers, it's our responsibility as maybe the last generation of people that have been trained in an outside AI world to really uphold this basic understanding of critical thinking that we have acquired throughout our own scientific training, and to train the next generation of researchers in specifically that. And what does that mean? That means this skepticism that we have, that is at the very nature of Karl Popper's understanding of falsifiability and science itself, is really something that we have to keep holding true. So being skeptical, not just of the AI hallucinations, but also being skeptical of these new categories that are being built. And every once in a while, going outside of that realm of being just cyborg everything, right? I think it's as important as it is to embrace these things and go full storm with them and help building these things. It is important to take AI retreats, basically, retreats away from the AI augmented work that will be normal as part of your life, where you kind of get to do the manual labor every once in a while. I think this is like important for yourself as well. Like every once in a while, like even if we have tools like a bicycle or these roller scooter things in Europe that you can scooter everywhere, we still like to walk every once in a while. We still like to go to the gym. We still have to train these muscles, right? And so in a similar way, your brain is a muscle. And if you don't train your brain muscle because you're just getting these extra brains from the AI, eventually I think it'll die down. It will not be as trained as it could be, right? So I think we have to create these spaces where we can still train ourselves in that critical thinking and that critical discussion. And I think one of the things that will happen is we will have maybe a resurgence of these academic retreats where that social interaction is fostered again. So in Sweden, where I did my PhD, we have this thing called fika. It's a coffee break where every day you meet, I'm sure Italians have I think you have 3 fikas during a day. In the morning, during lunch, and then after work, and then maybe before you go to bed. There's a lot of coffee in this country. So like in Sweden, it's like once a day they really have this coffee thing. And it was really important because a lot of the times you meet over coffee, you have these one-on-one exchanges. And I have to say, like, some of my best ideas came just in these weird discussions that you had. And a lot of the times, specifically if you seek out a discussion with somebody that's not in games or somebody that's not right in your research field, and you're just kind of talking about, I had this weird engineering guy and he was totally into philosophy, and his thing was about the law of thermodynamics, and he used to talk to me about that all the time. And so not something I understood much about, but really these discussions really kind of made me think about, okay, like this is kind of how I think about rule systems in games, and this is kind of a way that I could interpret the rule systems in games differently, and led to some of my thinking about rule systems and compliance in video game research. So yeah, I think it is really important. So we will have to foster these sort of social outlets where we can have these social communications, because I do think, it's not my area of research, but I do think there is, as you know, there is already research that says if you take notes by hand, you comprehend things much better. So just handwriting notes. And so I always tell my students in the lecture hall, it's nice that you have your computer and whatnot. And if you have an iPad, then please do handwritten notes on your iPad, right? Like, don't type the notes, or don't. The new thing with students is they'll just record my lectures into their favorite AI tool and just like do the assignment that way. It is not as good for learning than if they actually, even if you don't use the notes, this is a fun thing. So even if you don't use the notes, just the process of transcribing it by hand will actually make you parse the information in a different way. So we have to find these outlets, these manual labor outlets that still kind of put our brain under pressure every once in a while, so we don't lose that ability to critically think. Because once we get there and we lose that ability to critically think, we're entering Idiocracy, right? I don't know if you've seen that movie where everyone's stupid and Donald Trump rules. Oh wait, we're very close to that right now. Anyways, yeah, so we kind of want to avoid being a society like that, right? So, and as researchers, I think we are at the forefront of people that actually has the responsibility to do that for the rest of society, because we're used to critical thinking. It's our bread and butter, right? So we need to make the general public not lose that either. This is our responsibility as researchers, to ensure that the general public is also doing these thinking exercises. I think this is really our obligation for the future, to make sure that critical thinking enters the public and doesn't just stay in the ivory tower.
Thank you. So, no more questions? Yes.
Okay. So, first of all, thank you. What is currently the best way to mitigate the generation of hallucinations in an AI model? Particularly because if you are an expert, when you're searching something or you're generating something, you may know better, you know how to research the topic, and you know how to spot those hallucinations and correct them. But I find myself, in the last years, being a student, I didn't know better, so I didn't know if what the AI was telling me was correct or not. And this is something that makes a very bad impression on the users and also on the receivers of what you've produced, because they know better, so they know the problem, but you don't. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, this ties directly into what I said about critical thinking, and directly into this natural ability of a scientist to always be skeptical, right? So even in a pre-LLM when Google search came along, was the first time, right? Like, our students just used Wikipedia and Google searching to come up with their answers. But again, yes, Wikipedia has those editors that verify a lot of the things, but every once in a while false information makes its way into Wikipedia and students accept it as correct information because it's a trusted source in their opinion, right? So this ability and the core tenet of basically, this is hard, this is part of your training as a scientist, is basically you can't trust anything. This is the unfortunate nature of it, right? Like, just having the natural ability of questioning any belief that you have. This was the biggest thing for me in my PhD, and it's really at the worst during the PhD. It gets better after, but during the PhD you will have a phase when you enter this Karl Popper thinking of like questioning everything, where literally you will come to where you question time and space and gravity and everything, right? Like, that's the kind of level that every PhD should embrace at some point in their life. It's really weird because you get a little paranoid during that phase because you're like not quite sure what's happening. But it is a good way of like actually understanding that that is at the heart of science. At the heart of science is that a lot of the stuff that we understand as laws and rules and facts is actually based on somebody came up with those facts in the first place. So even right now, you're operating under what we call a paradigm. So this is a way of thinking. And as you talk with people from different disciplines, there's different paradigms. So there's different ways of interpreting the same laws and rules and facts that are out there. So just having that natural ability of understanding that you're operating within a certain way of rules and beliefs, and understanding that that might not be the correct way is super important. So I think maybe a little bit is about being humble and having hubris, and just like being okay with being incorrect, which is weird because on the other hand, all of the academic professors are all about like, okay, it's part of the grading systems, right? Like somebody's telling you you're incorrect, this is how you get a grade. Basically every time you do something, the professor will say this is correct or this is incorrect. This is actually a really bad way of looking at things because as philosophers will tell you, and if you get a PhD in theory, it's a philosophical doctorate, so you should have a little bit of philosophy in there as well, which is basically sometimes you just have to question the way that you interpret and view things. So a good professor should also always question the way that they're interpreting that knowledge. Unless you're like in a fundamental form of mathematics or logic, where really there's not a lot to question, a lot of the other fields out there, there is room for interpretation, there's room for questioning. And so, you know, back to your question about the LLMs, is basically every time you use an LLM output, you should treat it as a hallucination, right? So you should always question something and then do a backup search and see the sources that you get out there. What's the difference with that? So the difference is that, the problem that's coming with that is the slopification of the internet. So the internet that you see today is already slopified, like 50% of information is already AI slop, right? So it is getting harder and harder to distinguish what actual sources are. Well, luckily we still have libraries. So as long as we have libraries and we can go back to books and we can still check. And for us, I think this is kind of comes to the nature of why people still write papers, is because papers are set in a PDF somewhere, right? Like, and that is something like a print. So the PDFs right now, the way that we have this documentation in text that sits somewhere, is the closest thing that we can come to the truth right now, because somebody has written that down and done the study. And so we have to interpret that as the way that it's done within, again, that lens and that paradigm. A lot of it is positivist if you're in the sciences, right? So there's an understanding that something is falsifiable, right? Like, whereas in the humanities, this might be very different, and there's a lot more argumentation and rhetoric as part of this. So just kind of keep it with that grain of salt, and know first of all, understand that you're operating within a scientific paradigm. This was the biggest thing for me, because I didn't even know that. I'm just like, I'm just doing HCI, what's with that? And then, you know, my colleague, she was like really big into philosophy. She's like, you know, you're a positivist, right? Like, what? Like, I like life and I'm positive about life, or what do you mean? And then I started looking into that. And so I think it's important to do a little bit of that soul searching as part of your PhD. If you're doing a PhD, or maybe you're doing a master's. If you're doing a PhD, definitely look into paradigms a little bit and understand that this is the umbrella within which you're operating, and just accept that as part of your lens and angle on things. Because yeah, if you do interdisciplinary work, sometimes that very thing that you believe in might get questioned as, you know, this is actually not the thing that is right or correct. Does that help?
Any more comments or questions? No. So thank you again, Lennart, for the very inspiring talk. As you've seen, there is being a long and
good discussion,
participated discussion.
Thank you for the questions,
So
everyone.
thank you to all of you, and have a nice day, have a nice lunch.
Yeah. Thank you.